Well, here in Riyadh at the FII Conference, the real core issue in many ways is energy. That's what has generated the wealth for KSA, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. But what position is the Kingdom taking in the push for green energy around the world, particularly after the big announcements of 3 years ago? How determined are they?
This thing is actually happening. They're trying to do this in double time. Being here, you have a sense you're really observing a transformation taking place.
Well, I'm joined by Daniel Yergin, who is Vice Chairman of S&P Global. You're a long-time expert on geopolitics and energy, Dan. That's what your career has been about. And your book is The New Map, Energy, Climate, and the Clash of Nations. But what's your assessment? We've heard here from the Minister of Energy for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, making it quite clear in his words, using a lot of graphics, that the Kingdom wants to be ahead of everyone on sustainability.
I think the Kingdom is basically moving on all fronts, but it has some strong advantages. In fact, that its electricity is so cheap, and it is very committed to energy transition, but doing it in a way that's different than other parts of the world, with a focus including on the important role of carbon capture as part of the overall mix.
And they emphasize that in a presentation from the energy minister. But I've got to put it to you, can one really believe everything they claim, that they want to be the leaders?
Well, I think you could say the same thing about Europe or anybody else on that. I don't know if they're going to be a leader, but they have a very concerted effort. They're putting a lot of resources and money into it. They're very actively promoting wind and solar, particularly solar in the Kingdom, which gives them an incredible commercial advantage in terms of industry location. So I think it's a serious thing, and money and effort is behind it.
I was very struck by the energy minister saying, we're exporting all forms of energy, including carbon products. In other words, they're seeing this as a much broader shopping list, if you like, of what they can offer.
Yeah, so here's the thing, Europe has these carbon border adjustment mechanisms. So if you produce in Saudi Arabia where your energy carbon intensity is very low because you're using solar and so forth, that gives you a competitive advantage, and that's part of the argument, at least that they're making, for what they call green shoring in the Kingdom, for people moving from other parts of the world in terms of manufacturing. So I think, I've been at this FII now for a number of years, and the more you're here, the more you see that actually these things are really coming together. There is a strategy that's being implemented.
I was very struck as well when he said, look, we're in the business of developing new skills here. Essentially, in my interpretation of what he said was, we can't do it overnight, even if the world wants us to. We've got to have 17,000 people who are retrained and reskilled in order to achieve much more and in different ways.
I've heard it again and again from the program. They were talking about young people because, of course, their population demographic is very different than, for instance, Europe and so forth. They need to create jobs for a lot of young people, and they want to upskill them to be in these jobs. So this is a very big focus. If you just listen, you hear it again and again.
What about the absolute determination led by the Crown Prince right through the system here? What is your analysis of how much this is now really embedded 3 years into the program?
I think what comes away and people here are convinced this thing is actually happening. They're trying to do this in double time. Not everything will be achieved because things will be scaled back and so forth, but you're being here, you have a sense you're really observing a transformation taking place.
Do they have the resources to achieve what they say they're trying to achieve?
Well, they have the financial resources. Of course, it goes up and down with the oil price. I think that human capital is a very key thing, and education is a very key thing, and that has to be a big focus to achieve it. The 30-year period of globalization that we knew coming with the end of the Cold War is over. There's a redefinition, and people are looking. One strategic thing is redesigning where your supply chains are, and they've picked up on that, and they see that they have a locational advantage and they have an energy cost advantage.
The energy minister said we will maintain our preeminence in the oil sector, 12.3 million barrels a day or more.
Of capacity.
Of capacity. What does that mean in reality?
Well, that means that Saudi Arabia continues to be a huge oil producer. And by the way, I think that there's a rethinking that it's going to go on about energy transition and the timing of it, and that oil and gas are going to be part of it. Now they've said they have to have carbon capture as part of it, but they're at 12.3. What's also interesting how the world has changed, the US has gone from 5 million barrels a day to 13.5 million barrels a day. So we have a rebalancing going on in the global oil market that is, I think, is part of the source of the stability in the market today.
Can I interpret this, Dan, in the following way, that they're still going to be producing the 12.3 million barrels a day, but actually other things are pulling up and rising very fast?
Yeah, that's 12.3. Now they're lower than that, but that's their capacity. But their wind and solar, I mean, that's why a lot of companies are here, because they're getting into that. So I think they want to push their electricity as much as possible more towards renewables. And by the way, that frees up resources for export.
I was very struck as well by one phrase that the minister used, trust us and test us. Do they really want to be that open about sort of being told if things are not working out in the way that many might like it to be?
That's for them to say, but I think that one thing that you've heard here, I'm sure, Nick, is that the world is woken up to data centers, and the Saudis are saying that because they have such low cost electricity, they're very competitive in that, and that's what they're going to make a big push for now.
But he talked about the DNA as well. There's got to be a new trust in our DNA.
And trust is at the basis of investment, and this conference is all about investment and bringing investment into the kingdom. So you can have all the contracts in the world, but you need trust, and I think that's the message that they're trying to convey.
Now Dan, you've made your career, your long career in energy, based on good advice and sage thinking about what is coming down the track. What would you be saying about the reliance that we have still on fossil fuels, but so much changing with the sustainable fuels as well?
Well, I think there's a north-south divide. I mean, I think there's a view from Northwest Europe and the United States about energy transition, and a very different view. We did a conference in Malaysia, and the Malaysian Prime Minister said, we're going to pursue energy transition, but not the way we're being told to by other countries, because we have to worry about economic growth, we have to worry about poverty, we have to worry about health. And so I think there's kind of a rebalancing that's going on, and you look, last year was the highest ever for consumption in the world of solar and wind, also of oil and coal. So I think that's why I say the energy transition needs to be rethought to reflect the needs of the developing world, but you need the tools that go with it, such as carbon capture.
Almost 3 years ago, the world had a shock because of Ukraine and what happened with gas supplies, et cetera, et cetera. What kind of surprises and shocks do you think we should expect now? Or do you think there's a level of stability because of the readjustments that have taken place?
No, I don't think there's a level of stability. I think, and what you mentioned about Russia and Ukraine, that brought back something that had been forgotten, energy security, and that's complicated things for the energy transition as well. You had the German Chancellor going to Senegal saying, can you give us some LNG? The German Chancellor going to Canada, could you give us some LNG? He was just last month in Kazakhstan saying, can you give us some oil? So you see that energy security is part of the picture too. The risks are out there. The big thing that hangs over everything is what happens between the US and China in the next few years. So that, and I think the other thing we're seeing, and Nick, you've observed international politics for a long time, we're starting to see a melding of these different conflicts in different parts of the world, and I think that adds to the danger, and that's why wise statesmanship, this is a time for wise statesmanship.
But still at the same time, final thought if I may, Dan, there's still got to be a transition, and it's underway. Do you think it's moving at the speed that is necessary and the best speed possible given everything?
Well, I think you have to be realistic about it. I wear a hat as an economic historian, and it's a notion that energy transitions normally take over a century, you're going to do it in 25 years. The direction is clear, you hear it here, you hear it all over the world, but how it unfolds, it's going to be in a multidimensional way. It's not going to be a single line on a graph, which has kind of been imprinted in people's minds. We're going to deal with the reality of 80% of the people live in the developing world. They have a different type of agenda. So the direction is clear, the timing is much less clear.
Daniel Yergin, Vice Chairman of S&P Global, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on FII Television.
Thank you.